need to meet them halfway at some point. What do you say to that?
Just because the senator from Florida says it doesn't make it true. Keep in mind the Democrats were at the table wanting to do comprehensive immigration reform last year. And for several years now, we believe in border security. That's been proven time and time again in our votes. But this manufactured crisis, this manufactured outrage, and this crisis of convenience has been created by President Donald J. Trump, and he has to own the shutdown and own his failure on immigration policy. And while he is offering the Daca fix as a nugget, keep in mind the Supreme Court either last week or maybe even yesterday decided to not address the issue. So that means that the current Daca program will be in place for another year. And so this president is playing political games and wanting to really placate his base to say, yes, he is trying to do something, and the Democrats do not want to compromise. Pelosi and Schumer have been very clear about what they want in terms of trying to address this immigration issue. Step one is to reopen the federal government, put 800,000 federal American employees back to work first.
Sure, Michael, you're a Republican consultant. I mean, it's hard to ignore the fact. You look at the polls, it shows that the public is blaming the president for this shutdown. Is the president possibly losing the fight here on public opinion?
Well, I think the biggest concern for the administration right now is trying to shore up the base to put pressure on Republican senators who are beginning to walk away from the president, such as Susan Collins of Maine and others. I think right now what you're beginning to see, at least if you look at Republican voters, you're starting to even see the president lose some support there, particularly when you talk about the National Guard, for example. They have not received pay in over a month now, though they are expected to continue to work. You talk a lot about TSA agents in West Virginia. Joe Manchin just recently mentioned about 14,000 individuals there are working without pay. Those are individuals who supported the president. And so in order for him to continue to hold out here, he has to do something to shore up the base. And you do that by attempting to put political pressure on Democrats to say, this is what I am willing to do. Now you all have to come to the table and attempt to compromise with me on something.
Yeah, it certainly is true. I mean, double digits, I think it was the NBC NPR poll that showed with white evangelicals. That's significant. That's not something to sort of turn your nose up on. You know, Caitlin, how does this plan that we're hearing about now, how does it compare to other plans that have been floated? You know, there was one last month with Lindsey Graham. Where does this rank?
Well, we've seen Congress try to deal with this issue during the Trump presidency. Remember last year when we were at this position where the president actually ended up saying that Daca needs to be figured out by the courts. Congress had talked about a lot of different bills, and we're talking about the Senate here. The Senate had considered 4 different proposals. One of them was $25 billion in exchange for Daca. You didn't see enough support for that. You also saw the president during that discussion add in a request for changes to legal immigration, and that kind of scrambled everything and really put that issue aside because it just didn't garner enough support. Now, with something like this, you're going to have not only Democrats saying that this is a non-starter for them, but also Republicans, some like Steve King, who we've been talking about all week, and other conservative members of the House say, look, they don't want to vote on anything related to Daca or anything perceived as giving what they call amnesty to those here undocumented.
And just to be clear, Caitlin, this current plan doesn't provide a pathway to citizenship for these folks, right?
It doesn't, and it's temporary. And the White House strategy here, too, is that this is a bill, this Bridge Act, was co-sponsored by several Democrats, including Dick Durbin, who's a member of Democratic leadership. And so this is a way for them to try to put that pressure point on here. But Democrats have said, look, this was always a measure that was supposed to be temporary to get to an eventual solution for Daca, eventual way to address those who were brought here by their parents as kids, and now some of them are adults here undocumented. And so, but they're saying that, look, this was temporary and it's not going to be enough.
You know, Antoine, I want to ask you a little bit more. No matter what the president says, and actually, you know what, we see him walking up right now. This is a major announcement that he's expected to make. Let's listen in.
Presiding over the swearing in of 5 new great American citizens. It was a beautiful ceremony and a moving reminder of our nation's proud history of welcoming illegal immigrants from all over the world into our national family. I told them that the beauty and majesty of citizenship is that it draws no distinctions of race or class or faith or gender or background. All Americans, whether first generation or 10th generation, are bound together in love and loyalty, friendship and affection. We are all equal. We are one team and one people, proudly saluting one great American flag. We believe in a safe and lawful system of immigration, one that upholds our laws, our traditions, and our most cherished values. Unfortunately, our immigration system has been badly broken for a very long time. Over the decades, many presidents and many lawmakers have come and gone, and no real progress has been made on immigration. We are now living with the consequences, and they are tragic, brought about by decades of political stalemate, partisan gridlock, and national neglect. There is a humanitarian and security crisis on our southern border that requires urgent action. Thousands of children are being exploited by ruthless coyotes and vicious cartels and gangs. 1 in 3 women is sexually assaulted on the dangerous journey north. In fact, many loving mothers give their young daughters birth control pills for the long journey up to the United States because they know they may be raped or sexually accosted or assaulted. Nearly 50 migrants a day are being referred for urgent medical care. Vast quantities of lethal narcotics are flooding through our border and into our communities, including meth, cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl. Drugs kill 78,000 Americans a year and cost our society in excess of $700 billion. Heroin alone kills 300 Americans a week, 90% of which comes across our southern border. We can stop heroin. Illegal immigration reduces wages and strains public services. The lack of border control provides a gateway, a very wide and open gateway, for criminals and gang members to enter the United States, including the criminal aliens who murdered a brave California police officer only a day after Christmas. I've gotten to know and love angel moms, dads, and family who lost loved ones to people illegally in our country. I want this to end. It's got to end now. These are not talking points. These are the heartbreaking realities that are hurting innocent, precious human beings every single day on both sides of the border. As a candidate for president, I promised I would fix this crisis, and I intend to keep that promise one way or the other. Our immigration system should be the subject of pride, not a source of shame, as it is all over the world. Our immigration system should be the envy of the world, not a symbol of disunity and dysfunction. The good news is these problems can all be solved, but only if we have the political courage to do what is just and what is right. Both sides in Washington must simply come together, listen to each other, put down their armor, build trust, reach across the aisle, and find solutions. It is time to reclaim our future from the extreme voices who fear compromise and demand open borders, which means drugs pouring in, human trafficking, and a lot of crime. That is why I am here today to break the logjam and provide Congress with a path forward to end the government shutdown and solve the crisis on the southern border. If we are successful in this effort, we will then have the best chance in a very long time at real bipartisan immigration reform. And it won't stop here. It will keep going until we do it all. The proposal I will outline today is based on, first and foremost, on input from our border agents and Homeland Security professionals, and professionals they are. They know what they're doing. It is a compassionate response to the ongoing tragedy on our southern border. In recent weeks, we have met with large numbers of Democrat lawmakers to hear their ideas and suggestions. By incorporating the priorities of rank-and-file Democrats in our plan, we hope they will offer their enthusiastic support, and I think many will. This is a common-sense compromise both parties should embrace. The radical left can never control our borders. I will never let it happen. Walls are not immoral. In fact, they are the opposite of immoral because they will save many lives and stop drugs from pouring into our country. Our plan includes the following: $800 million in urgent humanitarian assistance, $805 million for drug detection technology to help secure our ports of entry, an additional 2,750 border agents and law enforcement professionals, 75 new immigration judge teams to reduce the court backlog of, believe it or not, almost 900,000 cases. However, the whole concept of having lengthy trials for anyone who sets one foot in our country unlawfully must be changed by Congress. It is unsustainable. It is ridiculous. Few places in the world would even consider such an impossible nightmare. Our plan includes critical measures to protect migrant children from exploitation and abuse. This includes a new system to allow Central American minors to apply for asylum in their home countries and reform to promote family reunification for unaccompanied children, thousands of whom wind up on our border doorstep. To physically secure our border, the plan includes $5.7 billion for a strategic deployment of physical barriers, or a wall. This is not a 2,000-mile concrete structure from sea to sea. These are steel barriers in high-priority locations. Much of the border is already protected by natural barriers such as mountains and water. We already have many miles of barrier, including 115 miles that we are currently building or under contract. It will be done quickly. Our request will add another 230 miles this year in the areas our border agents most urgently need. It will have an unbelievable impact. If we build a powerful and fully designed see-through steel barrier on our southern border, the crime rate and drug problem in our country would be quickly and greatly reduced. Some say it could be cut in half. Because these criminals, drug smugglers, gangs, and traffickers do not stop at our border. They permeate throughout our country, and they end up in some places where you'd least expect them. They go all over our country. A steel barrier will help us stop illegal immigration while safely directing commerce to our lawful ports of entry. Many of these security ideas have been proposed by Democrats themselves, and all of them have been supported by Democrats in the past, including a physical barrier wall or fence. Furthermore, in order to build the trust and goodwill necessary to begin real immigration reform, there are two more elements to my plan. Number one is 3 years of legislative relief for 700,000 Daca recipients brought here unlawfully by their parents at a young age many years ago. This extension will give them access to work permits, Social Security numbers, and protection from deportation, most importantly. Secondly, our proposal provides a 3-year extension of temporary protected status, or TPS. This means that 300,000 immigrants whose protected status is facing expiration will now have 3 more years of certainty so that Congress can work on a larger immigration deal, which everybody wants, Republicans and Democrats. And our farmers and vineyards won't be affected because lawful and regulated entry into our country will be easy and consistent. That is our plan. Border security, DACA, TPS, and many other things. Straightforward, fair, reasonable, and common sense with lots of compromise. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has pledged to bring this bill to a vote this week in the United States Senate. Our proposal is not intended to solve all of our immigration challenges. This plan solves the immediate crisis, and it is a horrible crisis. It is a humanitarian crisis like we rarely see in our country. And it provides humanitarian relief, delivers real border security, and immediately reopens our federal government. If we are successful in this effort, then we can start the border project of remaking our immigration system for the 21st century. Once the government is open and we have made a down payment on border security and immigration reform starts to happen, I plan to convene weekly bipartisan meetings at the White House so we can do a finished product, a great product, a product that we can all be proud of having to do with that elusive immigration problem. Whatever we do, I can promise you this: I will never forget that my first duty and ultimate loyalty is to you, the American people. Any reforms we make to our immigration system will be designed to improve your lives, make your community safer, and make our nation more prosperous and secure for generations to come. Thank you, and God bless America. Thank you.
Path to citizenship, Mr. President. You supported a path to citizenship last year, Mr. President.
I want to bring in now, after hearing the president, our panel of experts and strategists. CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns is here in New York, and Democratic strategist Anton Seawright joins us from Columbia, South Carolina. And Sher Michael Singleton is a Republican political consultant. He joins us from D.C. Caitlin, I want to start with you. Maybe you can set the facts straight. It seems like to me that he's going to try and protect DACA recipients from being deported for 3 years in exchange to get money for that border wall. He wants McConnell to pass it. He's going to present it to the Senate. Where do you think this is going to go? Well,
Democrats have already said that this is not something that they are going to support, and for a couple of different reasons. One, they say that they want to open up the government before they have any talks on immigration. And they also argue that the reason that many DACA recipients are in limbo are because the president ended the program, putting it into the courts, and it's still kind of mired up in the courts. The Supreme Court just this past week saying they're not going to take it up yet, and now it will kind of remain for several months. They also argue that it doesn't include a path to citizenship, which is something that they have wanted, and that it is still very temporary. They wanted more permanent fixes. But the strategy from the White House and from some Republicans who support the president is that this is putting the ball back in the Democrats' court, that the president at least is showing that he is negotiating here or wanting to negotiate. So from a PR perspective, they think that this is something that will apply pressure to Democrats.
I want to tell you, just shortly before the president made that address, we did get a statement from Nancy Pelosi just minutes before. And the sense is, I don't want to read the whole thing, but it essentially says that called this a compilation of severally previously rejected initiatives, unacceptable, does not represent good faith, no starter, some of the words she's using. Bottom line is, even before hearing the proposal, she's saying no game here. Antoine Seawright, I want to ask you, you're a Democratic strategist. I mean, at some point, the Democrats have to give something, too, and it appears that they're not going to cave on this.
Well, I call this the old throw and attempt to release by the president, throw out a plan to attempt to release political pressure, because he's starting to feel it, as polls have indicated, and 2020 Dems who are up for re-election, where the maps look very favorable for Democrats, are starting to feel it as well. And what people know is that the federal government employees should not be held hostage because of this plan. I think what you also hear from some Republicans in the Senate, may not be publicly, but privately, they'll tell you, is that there's no education in the second kick of the mule. There have been proposals brought to this president that he asked for in the last Congress, bipartisan proposal that did a number of these things, and he turned around after pure public pressure from his base and rejected these proposals. And so he cannot negotiate in good faith. I think Speaker Pelosi and her caucus have been very clear. Let's reopen the federal government. Then we'll work towards comprehensive immigration reform to include the things to do a long-term fix, not these temporary fixes such as 3 years that we heard from this president. And the fact that this president has a short memory. We have a Daca crisis because of him. The TP crisis is because of him. This manufactured outrage is all because of him. I call it a crisis of convenience. The number of illegal people attempting to come into this country are down from 2 years ago. Where was this outrage? Where was this crisis? Where was all of this fierce urgency of now 2 years ago, when the numbers were higher than they are right now?
I want to turn now to Shermichael Singleton, who's a Republican political consultant. So, Shermichael, I mean, the truth is, this is going to head to the Senate, but it's probably likely not going to go anywhere in the House. What do you think?
Right. Well, yeah, it's not going to go anywhere in the House at all. And Caitlin articulately pointed this out when she was speaking accurately. I believe that what the president is attempting to do is throw in some things that Democrats do support and sort of force their hand to say, no, we will not support this piece of legislation because you continue to ask for the, I think he said $5.8 billion for the wall. That would give him the ability to say, look, I at least attempted to compromise here. But what's interesting about this, and Antoine alluded to this, last year in the Senate, when Democrats and Republicans came together, many of the things that the president spoke of in his remarks were in what both sides attempted to bring together last year. And the president first said he was going to support it, and then days later he came out and said he was not going to support it after getting pressure from some in the conservative base. The president also said some things that were inaccurate. He talked about drugs pouring into the country. There's a trial going on right now in New York with El Chapo, where former drug smugglers stated an overwhelming majority of drugs that are brought into the country come through legal ports of entry. The president also talked about the failure of previous administrations. That was also inaccurate. President Obama was actually coined deporter-in-chief because he deported so many individuals during his 8-year tenure. Let's also keep in mind in 2006, the Strong Fence Act passed by both Republicans and Democrats that essentially placed 647 miles of fencing along the border. Well, from 2010 and 2015, data from U.S. Border and Customs Patrol indicated that that fencing was breached over 9,000 times, which cost taxpayers millions of dollars. So what the president is talking about, one, just does not work effectively, and two, you would likely have to utilize eminent domain for some of those places, which most Republicans will not support, and he has yet to address the continued maintenance costs for something that he's talking about. So I think there are a lot of holes here in the president's remarks that are just going to make Democrats not be willing to come up with a compromise for him.
Sure,
or
Michael,
with him, I should
interesting.
say.
I mentioned you're a Republican political strategist, to hear your take on that. Ann Coulter weighed in, another conservative who says, and this is what she had to say just a few minutes ago, 100 miles of border wall in exchange for amnesty, millions of illegals. So if we grant citizenship to 1 billion foreigners, maybe we can get a full border wall. Trump proposes amnesty. We voted for Trump and got Jeb. Caitlin, we also know that in the House, Nancy Pelosi says there's about 6 different bills they're trying to push forward to reopen. Any luck with that?
Well, they have been, the House under Pelosi now is controlled by Democrats. They have been putting forward bills and passing them over the past week or so to reopen portions of the government, fund portions of the government. They also want to apply pressure back on Republicans by putting forward measures that the Senate has already passed before Trump kind of backtracked on the border wall and said that this is going to be his position. This is before the government shutdown. So a lot of both sides trying to put pressure on the other. But the Republicans in the Senate have already said, under the leadership of Mitch McConnell, who is the Senate Majority Leader, that they're not going to pass anything that the president himself won't sign. So we're still kind of in this limbo position with both sides, at least at this point, pretty firm in their positions. Now, the president providing this today, we'll see what Democrats come back with. But for now, they're saying that this is not sufficient. This is not something that they could support. And remember, the president needs Democrats for anything that will get through Congress, not only because Democrats control the House, but because they don't have a supermajority in the Senate. So they still need Democratic votes in the Senate. You're already hearing from people like Dick Durbin, as a leader in the Democrats on the Senate side, say that he's not going to support this.
So, Antoine, I want to ask you, Democrats, somebody needs to come to the middle of the road, right? They've got to get together at some point. How do you make that happen?
Well, I think first and foremost, reopening the government. And I think you have to crawl before you walk, as we say down here in the South. And I think crawling in this case is reopening the federal government. Keep in mind, even though Congress has a low approval rating, they can walk and chew gum at the same time. And so I think Republicans in the Senate, particularly 2020 Republicans, are probably sooner rather than later will say, you know what, let's come together and put our federal employees back to work. It's so hypocritical by the Republican Party to talk about being American first when 800,000 American federal workers are laid off and held hostage because of the president's campaign promise of building a wall that Mexico was supposed to pay for. So I think that's the first step. And then from there, I think you will probably see some reasonable, moderate Republicans and some Democrats say, come together, you know what, let's put some money for border security like we did last year with the $1.6 billion allocated for border security. By the way, the president has spent less than 10% of that up to this point. And you'll start to see piece by piece, bit by bit, a plan to work towards an immigration reform package to include border security, to include something that would take care of dreamers, to include fixing the many holes that we have in our immigration system that people can live with in the long term, not just the short term.
I want to also turn to Shermichael Singleton. Shermichael, our understanding is probably within the next 30 minutes or so, Republican leadership will be gathering together to conference and sort of discuss this plan. Just based on Twitter, on the reaction from conservatives on the right, this did not go down well. They were very upset about this, the way this was handled with Daca and what was being exchanged. What do you think the Republican leadership needs to do in that meeting this afternoon?
Well, look, I think Mitch McConnell has to shore up some of those more moderate senators, such as Susan Collins, and there are others that are up for re-election, as Antoine alluded to. In 2020, there are, I believe, 18 or a little bit more than 18 Republican senators up for re-election. In some of those states, Donald Trump did not win by a large margin, and in some states, he didn't win at all. If you look at the Senate map, at least currently, Democrats, I would say, one could argue, are favored to take the Senate. And so Mitch McConnell has to figure out a way to keep those senators at bay. And I'm not certain how much longer he will have before he has to go to the president and say, Mr. President, I just don't have the support in the Senate. We have to compromise. I think the burden here is more so on Republicans, politically speaking, than it is on Democrats. I mean, over a majority of the American people, according to every legitimate poll, believe that this is a result of President Trump and Republicans' inability and unwillingness to compromise with Democrats. So again, politically, I don't think the odds are in favor of Republicans. And Mitch McConnell, who has seen his poll numbers in his own home state decrease significantly, is also thinking about the political outcome for him, where the president is far more popular in Kentucky than Mitch McConnell. So when you think about the political dynamics here, you begin to really see why McConnell is doing some of the things that he's doing, but you also see why the president is being such a hardliner here. You read the quote from Ann Coulter. You also have to think about folks over at Fox News, for example, or some folks on conservative radio who are going to say this is not conservative enough. If the president doesn't stand by this, we cannot continue to support him. So everyone, I would argue, both sides are looking at the political dynamics here. But again, I think Republicans have far more to lose than Democrats.
Sure, Michael, before you go, I do want to ask you, we were talking sort of about the reaction from conservatives on Twitter, some well-known conservatives who are upset about this Daca deal, potential deal. Do you think that this potentially could be the president who could do something significant in immigration reform that no other president has been able to do?
I don't think so. Donald Trump, and I hate to say this, but he has proven himself not to be a trustworthy person. And I think that's why Nancy Pelosi is really hesitant to try to negotiate with him. As I mentioned earlier, remember last year, Republicans and Democrats came together in the Senate to come up with comprehensive immigration reform. The president first said he was going to agree to what they proposed, and then only days later completely flipped the script, and you saw it completely unravel. So I think from the Democrats' perspective, one, they don't have a mandate to work with him, and two, they have to ask themselves, can we even trust what the president tells us? And I think history proves they can't.
Sure, Michael, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Sure, Michael Singleton, Antoine Seawright, and of course, our very own Caitlin Huey-Burns. Thank you all three for your analysis.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It has been a busy afternoon. We've got a lot more news to get to. We're going to take a quick break. Much more news ahead. Stay with us.